Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Workflows and Espressos. I missed you so much. It's been, I don't know how long it's been. A while, too long. Let's see. What has happened since I've been away? Well, I am 16 weeks pregnant, which is insane to think about. You can definitely tell, you wonder, you get pregnant and you're like, when is my baby bump going to be here? Let me tell you, she's here. She is fully visible. And I'm saying we're having a boy. She being my baby bump, my baby being an actual boy. But it's very fun. It's wild because I've never seen my body look like this before. So it is a little bit, it takes a second to get used to. But we are just so excited. We are prepping to move into a bigger house to be able to have a nursery. And so, yeah, over the course of the last 12 months, I've gotten engaged, married, and got a new job, got pregnant, and now I'm moving. It's been a whirlwind. It really has. But one thing about me and Clark is we like to just keep it moving. We're fast movers, and we like to keep things interesting, and we are very excited about this next journey. So I'll be updating you, as I'm sure you have missed my updates. First trimester was actually not bad at all. I did not have morning sickness, thankfully. The downside is that I ate everything in sight, and so the weigh-ins at the doctor's office have been a disappointing time for me. And I did get the flu recently when I was 13 and a half weeks, and that was pretty rough. I am still coughing and congested, so I don't recommend getting the flu when you're pregnant. I got the flu vaccine, still got the flu. Unfortunately for me, I was just unlucky. But aside from that, the pregnancy journey is going great. Clark and I are gearing up to spend about 5 weeks in New York City, here in a couple of weeks, the whole month of April, and then the beginning part of May. We are so excited. New York is my favorite city. I love it so much. And In-Haven is actually based in Bronxville, a suburb of the city that's about 30 minutes north of Manhattan. And I am so excited to be able to work with Ashley every single day and experience city life because, as you know, I live on 3 acres in Jackson, Wyoming, so I don't get a lot of city life, and I could use a store to buy some maternity clothes in. Without further ado, let's get season 3 started. I'm so excited. Okay, so when I was planning for season 3, I thought, what's amazing is that I'm starting season 3 at the very end of March, which just happens to be Women's History Month, and I have been craving conversations with women in the industry. Maybe it's because the Women's Summit is this year. I don't know. So I reached out to 6 women, maybe 7, several women in the industry that I admire and enjoy spending time with, and I wanted to hear their stories and I wanted to talk to them on the podcast. So throughout the season, we will have several guests, from female founders to data analysts to revenue managers to podcasters, everything in between, with some solo episodes sprinkled in. Of course, you know that I just love to talk to my microphone by myself, and I'm really excited for these conversations. I can't wait to get started. I can't wait for you to listen to them. So I then started mapping out my solo episodes, and I put a question on LinkedIn and asked for some topic ideas, and I got a couple of messages, and there were a few that I picked out because I loved and I thought that they could really result in an interesting conversation. So the first topic that I want to talk about is when to outsource on your team. And I was originally just going to talk about outsourcing revenue management, but I want to talk a little bit about accounting, call centers, and marketing as well. And if you don't already know, I did some revenue management consulting for about 2 years. And I think that's right, 18 months, 2 years. And it was a side hustle, side gig for me, but just a way for me to kind of keep my hand in the revenue management pot, keep my skills sharp, and worked with several of my friends and colleagues in the industry on a couple of client projects. And I also have been on the other side and used companies like Extend Team for call center assistance when I was a property manager. So, and also marketing help as well. So I have been a consultant and I have also used consultants. So I want to talk about this from kind of both perspectives today and dive into why people outsource, when I think it is time to outsource, what are the upsides and then also the downsides of using consultants, and everything in between. So let's get into it. Okay. So the first topic that I want to address, part one of the conversation, let's say, is why do people consider outsourcing? And I think this is such a strategic decision that you can make in your business. And to me, this is when outsourcing makes sense. So let's say your vacation rental company is growing too fast. I really think that outsourcing can help you expand without hiring full-time staff immediately. A lot of the time during this growing stage, you aren't sure what you're going to need yet. And you might need some short-term help, whether it be on the revenue management side, whether it be on the accounting side, before you really get your ducks in a row and you decide what you want your full-time team to look like. So I think like a short-term contract in the interim. Let's say you bring on a revenue manager for 6 months as you've just acquired a company to kind of get their bearings and really start to get your feet underneath you before you decide what you want your resources to look like long term. I think it is much easier than to go out and hire 15 new full-time employees and then be in a situation where you realize you don't need all of those employees and have to do layoffs or a lot of restructuring, which can be confusing and disruptive to the team. Expertise. So if you are in a situation where a lot of the times vacation rental companies promote from within, which I think is absolutely fantastic. It is how I grew in my career. But I also think a lot of times promoting from within or providing opportunities to people on your team who might not necessarily have the training, this like lack of formal training can create a gap. And so I think consultants can really help in the meantime, whether it is like hands-on formal training that they're providing to your team, or it is someone who just has more like specialized expertise that could come in and bridge the gap while the person on your team that you've promoted is getting up to speed. So for example, a revenue management consultant might be helpful over the course of a couple of months that your team member whom you've just promoted from within can learn from and provide that like hands-on, knows the inventory expertise while also learning from the consultant who is on a short-term contract. I also think it's helpful to consider outsourcing just for cost efficiency. Of course, full-time employees comes with salaries and benefits and training, and it's just a lot of overhead. Bringing on a new full-time salaried person onto your team is super, super, super expensive and time-consuming, and it requires a lot. And if you do not have the cash flow or you are really trying to keep things tight for a certain year, sometimes outsourcing can provide better results at a lower cost. So a marketing agency is a really great example. At my last company, we went through a restructuring and cut about $250,000 worth of salary on the marketing team and ended up hiring an agency for $6,000 a month who really covered the digital work primarily. So SEO, Google Ads, and managing that ad spend. And it was a significant cost savings for us, although we were not getting the full-time work of an entire digital team. We were saving a significant amount of money and really didn't see a downturn in revenue especially attributed to these marketing efforts from this agency that we were using. So I do think that there are occasions, and this might be a hot take, where outsourcing can provide better results at a lower cost. Not all the time. And then time savings and focus in general. I think as a business owner, a CEO, or someone who's leading a team in general, your time is limited. And I think it's really important to stay focused on strategic goals and initiatives. Keep your eye on high level, like, where is my company going? How am I going to get it there? And then having a team to help you execute your vision and goals. And if you're spending too much time on these like non-core tasks, I think outsourcing can allow you to focus on growth and strategy and help you get these like larger vision and growth goals set while having some outsourcing, some consultants on your team to help you accomplish these day-to-day tasks in the meantime. So I want to talk through what I think is easiest to outsource on the team and really dig deep into each one, specifically revenue management, because I feel like this is the most commonly outsourced department, and it can be really tricky trying to determine when to outsource. So I thought about this for a really long time, and I was trying. Amber Prickett from Price Labs asked me this question, and we actually were revenue managers together several years ago at 360 Blue. Didn't use consultants, and we had probably 500 to 600 units at the time. And it was just the two of us for a little while, and it started to get pretty overwhelming. So when I sat down to think about this, I think company size plays a lot into it. So I think short-term consultants can be best for smaller companies that are scaling quickly. So when it works to me is when companies have been relying on basic pricing tools or in-house revenue managers without any formal training or a lot of experience, because there really isn't a whole lot of formal training for revenue managers in the vacation rental space. Or let's say you're not using any dynamic pricing tools at all and you're doing things very manually, or you're kind of stuck in your processes. And I think it can be really beneficial to bring on a short-term consultant to analyze your existing strategies, help optimize your streams, your distribution, and train your team on best practices. So once your team is up to speed, I think that it is best to fully bring this function in-house and manage it more effectively. But I do think it can be really helpful to have someone kind of come in and do a seasonal audit for you to start to improve short-term revenue without committing to this like full-time hire. And I think revenue managers, especially speaking from experience, we can get set in our ways. And it's really helpful when you do bring somebody in from the outside who can help kind of challenge those existing strategies that you have. Consultants oftentimes are well-versed on every single dynamic pricing software you can think of. They work with several different companies. They have learned a lot of strategies over time. They know what the best of the best is doing, and they can really offer an incredible perspective. And we're at this really cool inflection point in our industry where there's a lot of options for revenue management consultant. And it does not mean that you have to bring somebody on full time and pay a consultant a lot of money. Like, you can do short-term projects to help your team get up to speed and really ensure that your processes are running as efficiently and as effectively as possible. So downsides of this, right? Consultants are obviously not available all the time. You are still working on their schedule. You still need to have somebody in-house that can implement and adjust strategies daily, that is on your payroll, that you can control when they show up to work and how they show up to work. And I think I often find that employees that are actual employees of the company are more bought in, of course, right? Like, this is their job. This is their bread and butter. They don't have any other companies that they're working for the most part. And so I think it's really helpful to always have an in-house team, even if it's just one person. And I think this strategy really works well for companies with like 50 to 200 properties. So these companies need expert guidance, but they might not be ready to have an entire full in-house revenue management team. And a lot of times you don't need one when you're that size. So you might want a one-time deep dive and then plan to handle things internally afterward. You might want someone to come in and work for 6 months and help your team get up to speed. I do think it can be challenging when you don't have an in-house team ready to take over once your short-term contract is up with a consultant. So I think it's always best, no matter what, once you get to 50 properties, to have a revenue manager. So long-term outsourcing. So when do you bring someone in just forever or indefinitely, I guess I should say? And I really think that this strategy is best for these like mid-sized companies. So think like 200 to 500 properties. And a lot of the times when you're in this stage, your payroll can get really, really heavy. So you want to try to stay lean. And I think this works if revenue management is not your strength. So keeping revenue management outsourced permanently can be more effective than having an entire in-house team if revenue management isn't your strong suit. If you feel like, number one, you can't go out and afford to hire a team of 2 or 3 revenue managers, if you have one person on your team who can kind of handle the majority of the day-to-day, but you really could use a consultant that works on a longer term contract for 20 hours a week, I think it could be really helpful. These consultants, again, have expert knowledge and they know all the market trends without this overhead of a full-time hire. And I think a consultant in this instance can consistently monitor your pricing. They can adjust your strategies. They can work alongside your existing revenue manager and ensure that the majority of your team is able to focus on other areas while you might just have one person dedicated to communicating with this revenue management consultant that you have or agency that you're working with. I think that it can be challenging when you have less control over your pricing decisions, which is why I always think it is best to have somebody internally, no matter what, looking at revenue. But I often think that consultants may prioritize just getting a property booked over the nuances of specific homes. And so making sure you have like well-documented processes for any owner restrictions that you might have or anything that's like specific to your area. A lot of times, right? Like consultants are looking at the data, which is so important, but you are the person, or your revenue manager is the person that is sitting in the office where your properties are based and understands the nuances of your area. And so making sure that these two people are working very closely together and kind of offsetting each other, I think is really important. And then picking an agency or a consultant that you don't have availability concerns with. I have talked to a lot of property managers who have used an agency or a consultant who say, hey, they weren't responsive. We had owners reaching out. They were asking questions we didn't know how to answer. Our revenue manager couldn't get a hold of them. And I do think that that can be really, really frustrating. So before you get into a contract, a long-term contract with an agency or a consultant, understand what their availability looks like and what the expectation is in terms of their responses. Do you want them to respond within 12 hours? Like make that clear and ensure that it is written in a contract. I think otherwise things can get really dicey and you can end up frustrated when you're just kind of sitting around waiting for responses all the time. And then of course, like costs will add up if you're outsourcing the entirety of your revenue management function indefinitely. So again, like I always recommend at least having, especially if you're at that 200 to 500 property mark, have somebody full-time dedicated to revenue management on your team, no matter what. But I do think that there is nothing wrong and can oftentimes be very helpful to use an agency indefinitely when you're between that 200 to 500 property mark, as well as this like in-house resource that you have. And then, I think this can be really helpful too for operators that just don't have the resources or honestly the interest to train an entire internal revenue management team. Or like I said, if you have somebody that's like relatively green, it might be better at data entry or communication with homeowners rather than like very intense data analysis that oftentimes revenue management requires. Now, I will say that when you're using key data or using price labs or using Wheelhouse, you are provided a customer success representative who can really also act as a consultant. Like this is just provided within the service, reaching out to them, making sure your revenue manager is having monthly meetings with these teams is so helpful. And this is not a plug for any of them, but it really is just the truth. Like taking advantage of the resources that are included in the tools that you're already paying for, I think is a huge, huge, huge opportunity that everyone should be taking advantage of. And then for large established companies, I think an in-house revenue management team is always the way to go. Having full control over your revenue strategy, your pricing, all of your adjustments, what your inventory looks like, how it is priced, what the seasonality looks like, a dedicated team that lives and breathes your portfolio, specifically when you have over 500 units, that is making these nuanced decisions that outside agencies might miss, I think is so important and ultimately better for long-term profitability. At this point, you have enough properties to justify paying 2 people, which at 500 units, I think that's what you need is 2 people. And then I think from there, like every 150 properties that you add, it is helpful to have an additional resource, even if it's just part-time, that is working for your company. Of course, like it takes time to train an entire team. You usually want one person that you trust that can head up this team, that can be responsible for building out your revenue team in general. And not every company has this expertise to develop a strong revenue management team internally. And look, there's nothing wrong, even if you have over 500 units, with using consultants on the side. This is just kind of the secret sauce that I think is really helpful. And of course, like this is higher salaries when you have a full-time revenue management team. But I do think that overall it is best for your company. You are to a point where you have owners, I'm sure, reaching out all the time. You have a high concentration in one area, or you're spread out across multiple areas. And so having this dedicated full-time team that you as the business leader, if that's your role, can always reach out to and have access to, I think is incredibly important. And this like idea of complete control over your strategies and understanding exactly what's being done on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis, I think is really incredibly important. So, of course, for everyone, a hybrid approach works best, right? When you're getting started, starting with a consultant to help kind of audit and optimize your existing strategies, then getting to a point where you're training someone in-house that can handle your daily revenue management. And then, if it works well for you, there is nothing wrong with continuing to use external consultants for periodic strategy adjustments. I think it is always best to have a fresh pair of eyes that can kind of come in and look and see what you're doing and what you're up to. But a quick rule of thumb, if you have fewer than 500 properties, outsourcing can be significantly more cost effective than hiring an entire revenue team of 2+ people. But as you grow, having this in-house team is going to give you more profitability in the long run. I'm very curious to hear everyone's thoughts on this. What you think, if you think I'm crazy, if this doesn't land with you. So reach out to me, write to me on LinkedIn, comment on my post where I was asking for episode ideas, and let me know what you think. Okay, so outsourcing marketing, something that I specifically on the digital side am I a fan of. I think this can be a great option if you do not have the expertise or time for digital ads, SEO, and the like. I am that person. Or like database management, collecting and maintaining a database. That is not my expertise. Like I was responsible for Google Ads when our director of marketing was on paternity leave for 8 weeks in like 2017, maybe 2016. And I literally spent like 10 times our budget in 1 month. Had no idea what I was doing, completely messed it up, haven't touched Google Ads since. I also think that agencies do a really great job of keeping up with trends and algorithm changes. They're looking at it every single day. They're working with clients every single day. And I oftentimes think that having outsourced digital assistants can be more cost effective than hiring a full-time like digital marketing director. Downsides to this, of course, there are always downsides. They do not know your brand voice as well as you do. Nobody does, right? They oftentimes aren't in your area if you work with an agency that isn't local, which oftentimes I find that local agencies can be more expensive especially in Jackson. And of course, agencies are juggling multiple clients. Your business is not their only focus. And a lot of times you can notice that pretty easily. So you have less control over the deliverables when you're receiving them, what the quality is like, what the content is like. So I still think that it is important being mindful of all of these things, ensuring that you are paying a fair price, you like the responsiveness, trust the agency that you're working with, you feel confident that they understand what your business is trying to accomplish. If it's within your budget, I think that outsourcing technical support and technical marketing tasks like SEO and paid ads, but keeping your brand strategy in-house is an incredible idea. I love having the creative team in-house. So social media designers who are like doing email design and then having the technical team outsourced is fantastic. I feel very similarly about marketing that I do about revenue management. Like once your company gets to a certain size, like usually over that like 500 property mark, no, I think it makes sense to have a digital marketing team in-house that is fully dedicated, right? Like that is a huge vacation rental company at that point. But until then, I think that these technical tasks that a lot of people don't have this understanding of, myself included, can be really helpful to utilize an agency for, and you can grow your team in other areas, right? Like a lot of the time at this point, like you're more focused on making sure homes are getting cleaned and that they're at the right price so they can book. So using this team that can work technically can often be really, really helpful while you focus on those operational items that need to be done in a vacation rental company on a daily basis. Okay. So call centers and guest communication. I have honestly like gone back and forth on this for a really long time, and I have a lot of thoughts. So I think that the answer to the why outsource question when it comes to call centers and guest communication, a lot of the time is like it reduces burden on internal teams. At 360 Blue, we had someone on call. We had an on-call maintenance tech and an on-call guest ambassador is what we called them, or guest services team member every single night. It was number one, expensive to pay these people. Two, it's exhausting. During the summer, especially, you're getting calls all night long. Then you have to go to work the next day. You're exhausted. It was hard to find the coverage, and someone had to manage and maintain the schedule. And it created a lot of burden and burnout on an internal team. By the end of the summer, the people who had taken on-call shifts were exhausted, understandably so. So I think that having an outsourced call center specifically for overnights can really reduce this burden. And having that coverage 24/7 for guest inquiries is huge. I think there was like some study that I read that's like if you respond within 7 minutes of receiving an inquiry, a guest is 7 times more likely to book. And that's really hard to do at 2:00 in the morning when you do not have anyone on your team that is available to respond to inquiries, or you're not set up to answer guest questions in the middle of the night. So I think outsourcing can be really great in these examples. And then, of course, like just answering common FAQs and reservations requests overnight. Like oftentimes you don't need somebody on your team to stay awake all night to answer guest inquiries. Like, is that ultimately a good use of someone's like overtime pay, which a lot of the times is very expensive compared to outsourcing a call center? I think the downsides to using an overseas call center specifically is it can be frustrating to guests. It just can be, right? How many times have you yourself tried to call Airbnb or Vrbo as a customer? I know I have. And you get connected with someone who is absolutely not in the town or the continent that you've booked on, and you're asking them details about the property. They can't find it on the listing, which is the only thing that they have access to. They're not in the local area to be able to answer any questions that you have that might be specific to that area. And that can be frustrating as a guest, especially if it's 2 a.m. You've been driving with your screaming kids all day and you're just trying to check in to your vacation rental and you can't figure it out, and you're trying to call a call center and you get connected with somebody and you're having a lot of frustration because they're not right down the road. They can't come and help you. They're not familiar with the area and they don't have access to the information that you want. Like these are real problems that need to be considered when you're thinking of outsourcing. And I also think that, like, of course, as with any consultant, they're just not as deeply connected to your business. They don't always speak to guests, like agencies don't always speak to guests the exact way that your team, your W-2 employees that have training guides and what is the word for like like the books with the the books. It's like a vernacular. Maybe that's the word I'm looking for. It's like if you work at Chick-fil-A and you have to say my pleasure, right? Like there are vacation rental companies who have like established a specific vernacular that their team speaks with, right? And oftentimes agencies don't pick up on that. And there can be a big gap with the care and time that your guests receive when they're talking to somebody that isn't a full-time employee of your company. And then I think there's consistency issues as well, right? Like guests aren't always getting the same person. I think ideally you have a team that people rotate through and you're talking to either, Jill, Sam, or Joe. And when you're getting 15 different people every single time you call, that can be frustrating to a guest. That being said, I think that as long as you are providing a lot of information to the agency that you're using. Let's use Extend Team, for example, which I personally had a really good experience working with as a property manager. Extend Team had full access to all of our training materials. They had access to our brand guide. They knew how we wanted to speak to guests. They were very familiar with the area because we did very rigorous training to ensure that if our guests spoke to one of our Extend Team members who was based in the Philippines, they did not feel like this person had never been to Jackson, even though they haven't, and had no idea what they were talking about on the phone. Like they could pull up the weather and they knew to do that if somebody asked what the weather was going to be like, and they were on top of it. They had access to very specific property details. And I think as long as you're providing that training and those materials, it can be really helpful at reducing the burden on your team. So I'm a fan. I think you just need to be very, very careful with monitoring, and then also understand that like sometimes guests are going to be pissed off because they're assholes and they don't want to talk to somebody overseas. And that is like a very real problem that I would be prepared to face, and then ensure that you have a response to that, which sometimes can be you're an asshole. Okay, so accounting and bookkeeping. I have primarily worked with in-house accounting teams, but we have had a couple of contractors, or I've used a couple of contractors in the past for specific tasks, specific times of years, and that has been very helpful. So why outsource on the accounting and the bookkeeping side? Professionals, no matter what, can reduce errors and ensure tax compliance and provide better financial insights. Fractional CFOs are great. They can bring strategic financial planning that your full-time bookkeeper might not be able to do without the cost of a full-time hire. And I also think before I started at Outpost, payroll and invoicing and tax filings were all outsourced for many years when the company was very small, like less than 50 properties. And it worked really, really well before we reached a certain size. And it just made more sense to have somebody in-house or have a team that was in-house. So I do think if you're relatively small and you don't have this expertise, nor do you have the time to go out and hire or the money to go out and hire somebody full-time, it can be really, really, really helpful to have an outsourced bookkeeper. Of course, they have less like real-time access to financial data. A lot of the time you're providing them information on a weekly or monthly basis. They're not in your information every single day. And it can be pretty expensive for ongoing support, especially when you get to a size where like you need to talk to a bookkeeper every single day. That is when I would say like it's probably time to have an in-house team. But I think hybrid situations work really well when it comes to accounting and bookkeeping. So like having day-to-day bookkeeping in-house, but bringing in CPAs and tax experts during tax season, I think is fantastic. Every company that I have worked for in on the vacation rental side has done this, and it has been really, really helpful because a lot of time these CPAs don't understand vacation rental specific tax filings. So they wouldn't be really helpful on a day-to-day basis, but come tax season, they work very well with a bookkeeping team. So of course, with everything, I hope my responses haven't been super frustrating because a lot of times it is a hybrid approach. But I think that's just the truth. I love a hybrid approach. No matter what, I wanted to come up with 5 key questions to ask yourself before outsourcing. So the first question that I would ask is, do I or my team have the expertise to do this well? Fill in the blank what this is. Number 2, is this task taking too much of my time away from high impact work that is moving my company forward? Number 3, would outsourcing this be more cost effective than hiring an in-house team or an in-house employee? 4, do I need this function to be available 24/7 or on demand? And number 5, is outsourcing this going to improve my guest and owner experience or my operational efficiency? And I think if your answer is yes to at least 3 of these questions, that outsourcing might be the best move in your circumstance. Everyone's circumstance is different. I think self-reflection is always best, of course. And if your answers to these questions are mixed, then I think it can be helpful to kind of start small. So trial outsourcing with a really limited scope before committing to a long-term contract, no matter what department it's in. And then I think just in general, keeping brand control and control over your guest and owner experience above everything else is of utmost importance, no matter what. And if you can maintain control over these things and ensure that consultants and contractors and employees are producing work that is in line with the guest and owner experience you want to provide, and within the brand guidelines that you have set, then you're doing great. So I talked for longer than I usually do, and maybe it's because I missed you guys so much. Okay, so of course, as with everything, outsourcing is a tool. It's not a solution that's going to fix everything for you, but I hope that was helpful, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts. I am very excited for the guest next week. I think this conversation is so timely, and I cannot wait to have you listen to this entire season. I'm really excited, and this is work I feel super passionate about and proud of, and amplifying women voices in our space is so important to me, and I'm very excited for the next 10 episodes. So subscribe, listen, go to my website, workflowsandespressos.com, and ask Meaghan if you have any questions. Reach out on LinkedIn, and I hope to see you next Tuesday. I missed you so much. And okay, bye.